mic check, please.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Ducks Unlimited podcast. I'm your host, Chris Jennings.
I'm your host, Dr. Mike Brazier.
My name is John Gordon. I'll be your host.
And I'm your host, Katie Burke.
Welcome to the Ducks Unlimited podcast, the only podcast about all things waterfowl. From hunting insights to science-based discussions about ducks, geese, and issues affecting waterfowl and wetlands conservation in North America. We bring the resource to you, the DU Podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Ducks Unlimited podcast. I'm your host, Chris Jennings. Joining us once again on the DU podcast is Addison Edmonds, the founder of Gunner Kennels. Addison, welcome back to the DU podcast.
Hey Chris, thanks for having me.
Also joining us today from Gunner is Luke Moore. Luke, welcome to the Ducks Unlimited podcast.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me.
All right. And hey, Luke, we're going to go ahead and just break in style here. Our audience is pretty familiar with Addison, but they're probably not very familiar with you. So like we do with every other guest, I'm going to go ahead and let you introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do for Gunner.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So obviously my name is Luke Moore. I actually been working at Gunner for around close to a year and a half now. I actually started on the customer experience team and started my career at Gunner there, and probably a couple months ago transitioned into the marketing team, which has been incredible. You know, I've gotten to know the product down to every bolt, and then go into the marketing team and kind of ensure I keep that customer experience for each customer, industry connection, and everything like that. So it's been incredible transitioning into the marketing team with that.
And before we get in kind of the nitty gritty with some of the new products, which are exciting for all of us to hear from new products from Gunner, I kind of want to just lay the groundwork here for the upcoming conversation with Addison and Luke and myself for our listeners to really understand what the reason why we're doing the show like this is. Luke has an older, aging retriever, black lab named Goose. And before the show kind of kicked off, Addison and I had these conversations where we thought it would be a good idea for Addison and I and Luke to kind of have this conversation about, Goose's last season. And this is potentially Goose's last season hunting with Luke. And Addison, before we get into this, kind of just explain where you guys came up with this idea and how this relates to, it's very similar to how, you kind of had your last season with Gunner.
This is something that unfortunately happens, and I think it's important to hear. I didn't really have anybody telling me any tips on anything with Gunner's last season. And I thought that the last 4 seasons were Gunner's last season, but figured it'd be good since we're kind of, Luke is living it in real time of, just going over maybe some ideas or thoughts on how to make sure that you're, getting the most out of it for you and your dog on their potential last season.
It's bittersweet, going into the last season, I get to experience potentially his last season, I should say, but getting to experience his, some of his last retrieves, and just it's bittersweet. You get choked up but smile at the same time because you look back at how amazing the dog's been in and out of hunting. So no, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's there's a lot to learn in a good way because, like you said, I'd rather be in this position getting a lot of feedback rather than nothing at all and just kind of going in blind.
Yeah. Hey, Luke, before we provide any potential guidance on this last season, tell us a little bit about Goose. Tell us how old he is and how long he's been hunting, and anything that really stands out about Goose.
Yeah, absolutely. So I got Goose when I was around 10 or 11 years old. I actually got him as a Christmas gift. I asked for a lab forever, and none of my family had a hunting dog before. I'd say my cousin had the only hunting dog I'd ever hunted over for a period of time. And that's kind of what put that itch in me to get one. And it kind of went from there. So I got Goose as a Christmas present and spent every hour I could after school doing basic obedience, the best that a 10 or 11-year-old could do, until I sent him off at 6 months old. He was trained for around 6 months until all the way up to now. He just turned 12 this month and going into his last season. So it's, again, bittersweet because I look back at all those times, countless hours, hundreds and thousands of hours I've spent with him. It's just one of the dogs that everyone thinks about of they look back and the dog with drive, the dog with the off switch that everyone likes to say, the dog that is insane in the field, but you get him at home and he's just a loving house dog. You never even think he hunts. And I mean that in the best way possible, but even here in the office, man, everyone's like, "Where's Goose? Where's Goose?" It's like he comes along with me everywhere, and it's awesome.
Yeah, and at 12, is he having some issues, or is it just he's just not able to do it physically, or why are you assuming that this is his last season?
So it kind of hit me the last season. He showed it a little bit, and I've never seen that out of him before. But it was the second weekend of the season. Probably 30 to 40 birds that day. And towards the end of the hunt, he just started stumbling a little bit. And that may not seem that bad with that many birds with a semi-older dog. But if you know him, he's all drive. He's just go, go, go. So to see that for the first time ever, it hit me pretty hard. So I just kept an eye on him. Started noticing little things here and there. He'd hunt just as hard, but it hit him harder later. That next day, it'd be real tough for him. So I kind of kept an eye on him, tried my best to keep him in shape. And again, you'd look at him, besides his gray hair on his snout, you'd never think he's 12, but his body doesn't seem to be keeping up with his drive at this point.
Yeah, I think we've all seen it with that, at that age group. I've got a 13-year-old female black lab now, and she really hasn't hunted for the last couple of years due to some injuries and some other things. But yeah, it kind of gets to that point where you can see, some things that the dog would never do, even like just wearing out or getting tired, or like you said, mention a stumble or something like that. With my dogs, as they got older, the first thing that I noticed was that second day, like they're all fired up for the first day. They do pretty much everything. Maybe a stumble, maybe you feel like they're getting a little slower. But that next morning when you go to wake, you have to wake up a dog that you never have to wake up before. It's like usually the dog's sitting at the door waiting on you when you get out of bed. And there I was, having to wake the dog up. Like, hey, wake up, it's time to go. So that's kind of the first thing that I realized when I had, an aging retriever. But Addison is, going into that last season for you was a little bit different. It sounds like in a different scenario, but probably very similar mentality. What would you, tell Luke or anyone, any listener out there who potentially has an aging retriever? What would be some of the key things that you would tell them to do? Something that you would really like, hey man, don't forget to do this.
Yeah. Before we get into that, I haven't hunted with Goose, but he does not act like he's 12. I think that Luke's going to go into this thinking this is his last season. He might still get a couple hunts with him the following season. He's a phenomenal dog. You can tell anytime I walk in the office, he's the first one I see, and I connect with him because he's just a good older dog that I can tell is a special dog. But yeah, I mean, there's a ton of things. Like I think we did an article in maybe Wildfowl a few years ago. It was like Gunner was 8, and it was called Gunner's Last Run or Gunner's Last Season or something like that. I literally every year was like, because like you're saying, after a weekend hunt, I mean, he couldn't walk. I'd have to pick him up to go take him outside to pee. And I switched up his food to like a super healthy, fresh, also super expensive, but it was worth it. The food, and then I started giving him Adequan, and within 6 months, it was within 2 months, it was like he shed a couple years off, and was able to get 4 more seasons out of him. But with that being said, if it is his last, I think number one, enjoy every minute of it. I used an e-collar on Gunner pretty much just so I could communicate with him when he was like way far out, but the whole last season I didn't put a collar on him. I just wanted him to hunt, do his thing. I would really encourage you, and this is something I always was bummed that I didn't do with Gunner, and actually just started this with Chevy. I took him on his first dove hunt 2 weekends ago, and in Alabama, and after each hunt I have a journal, and I wrote out how many birds he picked up and the conditions and any notes, like anything that he surprised me with. And so I would suggest keeping a journal for that last season, really making sure, because I didn't do that for Gunner's last season, and I was lucky enough to be able to keep a bird from every hunt and got him mounted. And I can go back through my photo albums and see exactly where I was and who I was with. But I'm walking down the hallway 2 years later, and I'm showing somebody the ducks, and I'm like, that hunt was from Kansas, that hunt was from Mississippi. And I looked at one and I was like, I can't remember if that was Oklahoma or Alabama. If I had a journal, I would really think I would like to have read it, even now, but in 10, 15 years, I think that'd be a good thing to do and be able to look back on, but just enjoy it and have fun is kind of the two things. And Luke, I know you would never put put Goose in a situation where, you know, it's hurting him and he probably would never show it. But, you know, be mindful of how he's acting in the field. And there's always a fine line of like, I knew Gunner wanted to get every bird, but I knew his body couldn't really do it at the very end. So yeah, you just got to be mindful of that. And Chris, we've talked about this before, but you're in this too, on your dog's likely last season. I'm sure I'm missing something. What are some other pieces of advice?
You mentioned not really putting them in a position to injure themselves. But I think one thing that I did with my older dog, Cole, was I really put them in the position to succeed no matter what, if that makes sense. You know, it's like instead of, you know, trying to, you know, go hunting in an area where I knew there was like thick cattails and we were going to drop a bird back there and he was going to have to spend time getting it and he would have gotten it. But, you know, we hunted like some smaller potholes with not much vegetation around them and very easy retrieves, you know, kind of set the situation up. And I'm sure maybe you did that with Gunner as well, but, you know, that's something to definitely think about. And also, like I mentioned, the back-to-back hunts. You know, I sometimes maybe it's better to leave the dog at home on that second day because you can really put them in a situation where they're not going to want to sit it out and they could, you know, potentially run into injury. So what kind of habitats are you typically hunting, Luke?
So all of my family's from Southeast Missouri, so we're usually hunting over there in rice or bean fields. So It's not terrible. We used to hunt kind of a deeper bar pit that some cows ran through with some super bad mud, some deeper water as well. But thankfully, we're back into some rice and bean fields now. But one thing I really took out of that quick conversation is just like knowing the retrieves to let your dog go on. Because the one thing that stuck out to me from last season where he was stumbling, it was a pretty far retrieve. You know, when he was 4 or 5, that would have been nothing. But again, at this age, you know, it keeps playing in my mind and stumbling and struggling, and it's hard to even think of. So I think it's just going to be a quote unquote sacrifice to even pass on some birds, just let them be right in front of you to have them experience a great, potentially last full season. So it's just, I'm thankful to even get some feedback on it because it's going to make a super hard process a little bit easier.
Yeah, and I think, you know, one thing with my older lab, he, on his last hunt, I do remember we kind of said it was his last hunt, and then like it didn't end up being his last hunt because we found some birds on this little bitty pothole thing that we could basically drive right up to it, because what his issue was getting in and out of the car. He had gotten so feeble at that point. But getting him out there, you know, we could basically just lift him right out of the truck and set him down and he can sit right there. And then, you know, we drove away obviously and then set up decoys and did that. I think that's one thing for people to keep in mind, the getting to and from and getting in and out of maybe a side-by-side or a truck, anything like that. That's certainly something that I would pay attention to just to, you know, increase his longevity there and avoid any potential injury, because that's what's basically happened to my female now, is that she's just been injured for the last few years. You know, Achilles tear. She has a bone in her right front paw that's broken inside, and the only way to really fix it would be to seal it up all the way up the ankle. And I'm like, nah, you might as well cut her leg off rather than seal it all the way up, you know? And so she has some limitations on what she can and can't do there. But I would definitely pay attention to that, the getting to and from the blind. Addison, does that make sense?
Yeah. And shameless plug, we actually make dog kennels that you can use to take out there. You can put them in the truck, you can put them in the Can-Am.
Yeah, this was this was about 18 years before Gunner was founded. So
yeah. But no, Luke, are you taking Goose? We're going spec hunting in Arkansas this weekend. Are you taking Goose?
I don't think so. I'm trying to plan out kind of the hunts I'm taking him on just for I don't want to put any pressure on him or me. You know, I don't want to push it. I want to give him some easy hunts throughout the year, even if it cuts down the hunting. I think it's a happy medium. But no, I don't think I'm going to bring him this weekend. Because
I do remember field hunts were kind of just easier on them. And there's also some people would say like water is easier on them. But I noticed personally with Gunner that field hunting, he could get around a lot easier. But I might be able to convince you to change your mind on that, because that'll be Chevy's first spec hunt. And I know they've got other dogs, but we might could bring them out. We'll figure it out.
Yeah, I think we can talk about it.
Yeah, that'd be cool to have one of the first hunts and potentially one of the last. That's kind of a cool tie-in with the dogs. And I definitely would agree that probably a dry field hunt, or I know Arkansas in general right now is lacking in water. So I think that may be a little bit easier. At least water hadn't been sitting on those fields for the last couple months, really creating that thick mud. That could be a lot easier.
Yeah, I think that's I haven't really thought about that before, but one thing I'm doing, and it's kind of similar to what you Addison did with Gunner with his last season, how you got a bird from each hunt. I'm obviously mounted Goose's first retrieve and put it on a dead mount. And the main reason I did that is with the dead mount I did, you can add birds to it as many as you want. You just got to make the kind of the display bigger. So what I'm doing with his last season is just getting a special or trophy bird, quote unquote, from the season. So even if it's not every hunt, a trophy bird that my dad might kill and he retrieves, a special bird throughout the season, I'm going to add to that. And if it comes down to 20 birds I'm adding, so be it. But it just gets me thinking.
Yeah, and one thing I forgot too, and this doesn't apply because we're right on the edge of hunting season, but I remember, with Gunner, they said he wouldn't make it to hunting season. And so in October we went to a pen raised, place to hunt. And I think that's a great thing to do for older dogs. If it's not hunting season, you can go to a place just to get him, some retrieves. But I don't think you're going to have to worry about that.
Luke, from the way Addison's describing it, you may have like 2 or 3 seasons of the last season, and that would probably be a good thing.
I won't be mad about it a bit. I keep telling myself, it's like, okay, this might be his last full season, but surely I'll be able to bring him on a couple easy hunts in the future. But, I'm just going to be thankful for each hunt I get with him. He is one heck of a dog, man. I know I keep saying it, but he's that. I know he's going to be the dog for me, the dog that in 20 years I look back and I hate to say it, but compare each dog I get to him. And it's not going to necessarily bring that dog down, but there's key points that I did with Goose that I will want to do forever and ever with another dog. So it's going to be incredible to see, man. It really will be.
Yeah, that sounds like it's just going to be a great, season overall. Looking forward to that. I got a couple other things I want to talk to you about Goose, and then we're going to get into some new product stuff. But let's take a quick break here and hear a couple messages from our sponsors. All right, everybody, we're back with Addison Edmonds and Luke Moore from Gunner Kennels. And we've been talking about Luke's Black Lab Goose, who is potentially, looking at his last season of hunting. And so I know Addison has had some recommendations, and I've kind of thrown out a couple things. One thing that I wanted to point out to you, Luke, is taking lots of pictures. Now, one thing that is a little bit different from, when I lost my first lab, we didn't all have cell phones in our pockets with awesome cameras in them. So a lot of the pictures that I have, were taken and printed. And so I have a lot of pictures of that dog, Cole, and I have them even in my office here at Ducks Unlimited. And I'm pretty proud of those because it's like, oh, yeah, that was my first dog. And so one thing that I would recommend, and I don't know, Addison, you can kind of chime in here too, but, get lots of pictures, and not only pictures of Goose retrieving and Goose hunting, but pictures of you and Goose and Goose and your buddies that you hunt with. I hope that makes sense. Addison, is that something that you did with Gunner?
Yeah. And I always would try to take lots of pictures of him, but I was lucky enough we had a photographer on some of the hunts, and that's something I never think of, is getting a picture of me with the dog. So I think that's a great point to try to get a bunch of both y'all. Good tip.
And while we've been kind of providing some tips there, I'm just curious myself, Luke, what are kind of your expectations for this? I think that's kind of a weird question, but, we've kind of provided a few things for you, but, what do you really want to get out of that?
Yeah, that's a super good question that I honestly haven't really thought of. It's just been trying to provide a season where Goose can enjoy it without struggling much. And, that's based on a lot of variables, but on my expectations, it's just, I was telling my wife, who I'm lucky enough loves to hunt with me every once in a while. I was telling her that I would love to see him just have some special retrieves with everyone else. He's retrieved all of my birds that I can think of. But last season he got my wife's first duck, his one of the last retrieves of that season. So I just want to see more of that. I want to see some awesome birds come out. My dad, I hunt with some of my closest cousins. We hunt all the time together. So that's the main expectation to see. It's obviously a healthy season with Goose, but to see some meaningful retrieves to end it, at least potentially end it, I should say.
Yeah, Addison, you mentioned you had multiple seasons with Gunner there, but did you go into that kind of with an expectation of what you were trying to get out of his potential last season?
No, and I didn't even have any hunts like really planned just because he wasn't supposed to make it past, I think, December, but he kind of turned around and made a last push. So where in January, I think I took him on 17 hunts. And so I was flying by the seat of my pants, just going from one state to the next and just trying to be very mindful of him, and would bring different supplements and medicine and pain medicine and just whatever I could, but really no expectation. I remember one day, I think in Oklahoma, it was 40-mile-an-hour winds. If it wasn't that, it felt like that. And I don't think we cut a feather. We might have shot one bird, but I remember just being so excited because he was supposed to be dead at that point. And so every day I would get to take him hunting was like a bonus. And so I was just enjoying every minute of it. Even at night, Gunner would come up and rub up on me all excited like he used to when he was really young. We had a big day of hunting. So I didn't really have any expectations. I was just trying to, see if he could make it and just try to let him enjoy it. So kind of a different situation, but yeah, I think that's probably the right attitude, just not having too many expectations. Cause then you might be fighting yourself on, I really wanted to get a limit and we're 2 ducks away, but might be really cold or something. And I think that's the right attitude, is to not really have any goals or expectations, just taking it all in and enjoying it.
Yeah, and you brought up the point, where you mentioned Gunner's kind of rubbing up against you after a hunt, something like that. I think that's another thing to keep in mind, Luke, is not always necessarily the hunting scenarios here. It's, at camp and maybe setting decoys or, whatever, some kind of special moments there that everyone kind of does something a little bit different with their dog, but probably take advantage of those as much as possible.
That's a great point. It's after all of this, that's one thing that I've looked over. Obviously, he's spoiled to death, and I think Addison can contest to that. But that's a great point. One thing, it's as stupid as it may sound, after every hunt, if there's tall grass anywhere, his favorite thing to do after a hunt is to go mouse hunt. And believe it or not, he gets so much joy out of that. And again, as stupid as that may sound, it's one thing that he's always done since he was 6 months old. So when he stops mouse hunting, I think something's really wrong.
That's awesome. That's perfect. You're going to have to just take him out in the field after the hunt and just let him mouse hunt for a couple hours. You just sit out there with him.
I think we can do that.
That's cool. Well, cool, man. I'll tell you what, Luke, it's a cool story. Goose sounds like a great dog. I'm glad you were able to, kind of share this story with us. And I really think, Addison, some of the advice that you provided is awesome. And what I think this could really help some of our listeners who are facing, a lot of the same situations. And maybe I think the best point we got out of this from both of you, and you guys just mentioned it, is maybe not setting an expectation and just kind of going with it and trying to enjoy it. So good luck with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Spoil them. Stop at McDonald's and get them a cheeseburger every once in a while.
Cheeseburgers. Every dog
lots
likes
of bacon.
Yeah, lots of bacon.
Noted.
That's great. Well, cool. I think this is a great opportunity here, just kind of to transition a little bit and talk about really the nuts and bolts of Gunner Kennels. And you guys, obviously, I think last time you were on, Addison, we announced the Ducks Unlimited line, and I know people were excited about that. And now you've got a couple different additions, some accessories and some different systems. Do you want to go ahead and explain what some new products you guys have out this fall? One being the door for the cold weather system, and start with that one, and then we'll just kind of go down the line.
Sure. It's interesting because we were talking about, I was bringing up memories of Gunners last season. I had a prototype for this cold weather door kit I was using in Kansas, and I remember it was really, really cold in the morning, and it warmed up in the afternoon, so much so that I took the prototype off. And that was a big, I actually took those lessons of why it was difficult to take off on the prototype. So I came back to the office and told my engineer, Drew, we've got to figure this out. This is way too hard to take on and off. So we've got a cold weather door cover it's really, we've got the all-weather kit to cover the sides and the windows, but this door cover is for, I'd say, really cold conditions, which, being in the Southeast, you don't need a bunch, but you still would need it at some points. But, once you get further up north, it gets really cold for a long time. And this door cover, it mounts very simply, and it's very easy to take on and off. Which is good for like when it, if it warms up throughout the day, you just pop it off and you're done. But we've noticed with the all-weather kit and the door cover, your dog will, I think he spends like 20% less energy to stay warm in the kennel compared to other options. And we've tested that, and I'm sure we're going to have more data on that when we launch. But yeah, we're launching just a couple weeks, I believe, and really excited about it because it's one of our most requested products, and we always try to listen to the customer and I've got my ideas on what we should do for products, but we never want to not stay connected to our customers. So this is something that I was just in a meeting with our customer service team, and they were really excited for it coming because they still get a lot of requests for it. But it turned out really nice. I can't wait to launch and show people because I think it's going to be very beneficial for a lot of people that are, have their dogs in the back of a truck and a kennel during those really cold months.
Yeah, can you just explain? I'm trying to visualize how you can get that door off so easily. You mentioned that it's really easy to take on and off. Kind of explain to our audience. So yeah, go ahead.
The cover is it's somewhat flexible material, but it's got really strong magnets in the top and bottom of it. And you replace the nameplate on the top with a powder coated steel plate. And then you put a powder-coated steel plate on the bottom spot where we've got a opening for a name tag, and the thing just pops right on. And it's almost too strong of magnets, like it really stays on there. But I thought, I did a lot of testing on it, and I've got one of those truck vault toolboxes in my truck, so the kennels sit up higher than it normally would because the toolbox is on the whole floor of the bed. So I was thinking, what if people are, have their kennel facing the side and they've got one of those toolboxes? Like, I'm not going to depend just on magnets. So we've got a little backup tether with a carabiner that you can lock onto the tie-down pin or the door in case something was to ever happen where really strong winds, was able to force the cover off, which we haven't seen, but just kind of a backup to keep, a hold of that cover, just a little backup safety mechanism. It's got some holes in there for some ventilation just because you still, don't want to have them completely covered. And we've done studies on like the amount of CO2 in the kennel and everything. We've got a bunch of data that we've been testing on to make sure that your dog's going to stay safe. And I also think, we're going to have, because it can keep your dog so warm, some language about when not to use that product just so that the dog doesn't get too hot. But yeah, it's, I know that's probably hard to visualize, but I'm sure we're going to have some great imagery and videos of it when we launch it.
Oh yeah, I bet you will. Just kind of on that side note, as you're describing it, and and this is just something I'm curious about. What is one of the accessories that you guys came out with that complemented the kennel? What would you say is like the best accessory that you guys came out with that complements your kennels?
There's a couple running through my head. So we sell a lot of the beds and the pads, but the fan is really good for pushing air through the kennel and keeping it well ventilated. We actually have a wheel kit that we had a lot of requests from customers to be able to roll the intermediate kennel around. And I don't think we've promoted it as much, but you pop out the drain plug and you put this bracket in and put the drain plug back in, and you got wheels for your intermediate so you can roll it around like the large kennel. Luke, what am I missing? What's some accessories that are doing really well, or really fixing I guess the all-weather kit's another one.
Yeah, the two that come to my mind, aside from the beds, I'm a little bit biased with an older dog for the ortho bed. It's insane. Like, you go in there with the ortho bed for an older dog like Goose, and he's comfortable. It's not in the back of your head, and he'd be fine without it. But like you said, to spoil your dog a little bit and to have as much comfort on the hips and joints, it's incredible. But aside from an older dog, two that come into my mind are the all-weather kit and the fan kit 2.0. The all-weather kit for me, it's not necessarily going to keep the kennel a whole lot warmer, but it's going to keep it from getting colder, if that makes sense. So it's going to keep those elements out, the wind, rain, snow. So again, that's always in the back of my head. If I didn't have it, I don't want my dog getting wet and cold if she didn't have to. And vice versa in the summer, I had it could have been scary experience if I didn't handle it the proper way. But my wife and I, along with some of her family, went to a car show a couple weeks ago, and obviously thought I'd always bring Goose with me. I didn't think they'd mind. I brought him, and they didn't end up allowing dogs in there for the first year ever. It was around 80 degrees, and he probably would have been fine in the kennel, but to put him in there and put the fan on the high speed, it was awesome to experience that. Whether you're stopped in traffic in the middle of summer, you don't want your dog sitting in 100-degree heat in the back of the truck. So to flip that fan on, it's a game changer. It allows for a wider range of opportunity and travel with your dog.
Yeah, and you guys just updated that fan kit too. It would have been last year, probably about this time when you guys did the updates on it. But I know a lot of people that have the fan kit 1.0, and so can you just kind of describe what the fan kit 2.0, like what were the upgrades there?
I'm going to take a stab at this.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just let me know what I missed. So the new one, it's got 2 speeds, low and high. The low speed is actually the only speed option on the first one. And it's got a high speed that's like over double that. So it's moving twice as much air. It's got LED lights to indicate the battery life. And it's got a new battery that lasts, I think on the low speed it'll last like 20 hours. And in the high speed, it'll last, 8?
Yep, around 8 or 9.
Yeah. So much better battery life. You don't have to remove the battery like the old one, which I just found aggravating to try to remove it. You just plug it right in. And then what else did I miss, Luke?
I think that pretty much does it. The battery life for me is my favorite part. Again, in that situation where I left Goose in the kennel with the fan, it didn't cross my mind because fully charged 20 hours. I'm definitely not going to be in the car show for 20 hours, even 8 to 9 hours on the high speed. So that pretty much hits nail on the head. Aside from just like the fan kit 1.0, you could purchase an accessory where you could run it to a cigarette outlet and vice versa. With this one, it comes in the kit. So you have that option of when you're traveling, once that fan's past 75% charged, it'll maintain that charge. So if you're traveling across the country, you're covered. So it's pretty cool.
Awesome. Hey, Addison and Luke, is there any other accessory that we forgot about here? Anything else new that you guys got coming down the line?
Yeah, so we've got the kennel bowl that is a water food bowl that mounts to the inside of the door of the kennel that we launched a couple months ago, and that's doing really well. We also have another example of listening to our customer. We have longer tie-down straps. So if you have a long bed truck or if you put your kennel all the way up towards the tailgate and can't strap it to the back anchors up against the cab, we've got 14-foot straps versus the original 8-foot straps. And we also sell them in a combination where you can do 2 8-foot and 2 14-foot, which is really nice. Then I think also we launched the Mossy Oak Bottomland collection. So we've got 10 products with the Bottomland pattern that I think is doing really well. And then in terms of new products, tomorrow we're launching our food scoop. So we've got a dog food scoop that complements the food crate, and it's measured out to where you can easily measure 1, 2, or 3 cups, and it's super durable, indestructible. I've left it with chewing dogs for a long time and can't put a dent in it. Made in America. Pretty excited about that.
Awesome. Sounds exciting, man. All kinds of new exciting stuff coming from you guys. And before we get you out of here, I got one last question, and that's just something that you kind of touched on it a little bit earlier when you were talking about taking Chevy on the first dove hunt. But I want to just get an update on Chevy. You had introduced Chevy on the show, what would have been last fall, and now where's Chevy? How's the training going? How are you handling it? How's the process?
Yeah, so I guess I got him right at the end of duck season, like in February of I guess that this year. Yeah, because he's only 11 months old.
Yeah, that's right. It was on the summer show when you mentioned that. That's right.
So I trained him as best I could and realized this is a really important year, his formative year, and his trainer, Miles Durham, is up in Kentucky, so he's an hour and a half away. So I would send him with him for a few weeks at a time. I'd come back and get him and keep him for a week or two and then send him back. And he actually took him to a hunt test. He got a started pass and took him dove hunting 2 weekends ago, I guess. And he really surprised me with how much he's progressed, hand signals, stop on the whistle, heel, bring the bird back at heel. He did really well, and we're taking him spec hunting this weekend and excited to see how he does then. But I've got him back full time now, and he's part of the family and enjoying that and doing really well. I think he's probably, I don't know, probably because a professional trainer trained him. He's earlier than, I guess, learned more than Gunner did at this age. And so really impressed with how he's doing, and can't wait to see how he does this duck season.
Awesome. That's exciting. So what is the biggest shift, other than, a professional trainer, that you didn't maybe remember about having a young lab at the house?
Oh yeah, it's pretty hard to go from a 12-year-old dog that you just know everything that they're thinking, and they know everything you're thinking, to a puppy. Well, I've got 4 of the young kids, and now you've got this puppy that, right now I think he's kind of in those teenage years where he still wants to rebel and not really listen to you all the time. And so trying to get back in that mode of being patient with them, but also making sure they understand when they're, stepping out of line. And so it's kind of a balance, but I'm trying to relearn it all. And he does really well getting in the crate and staying in the crate, and, taking him to the office. He does really well on place. And so I can just put him, I've got like a bottom half of a kennel right beside my desk, and I just tell him to place there, and he just stays right there. And but he's also made some mistakes. He jumped up and ate somebody's food off the table about a month ago. That was not his best moment, but no dogs are perfect, and they all have character and quirks. So, but yeah, he's fun. The kids are loving him being back home full time.
That's great to hear. That's exciting times. Man, guys, I really appreciate you guys joining me on the show here. It's been awesome. Luke, it's great to hear about Goose. I'm looking forward to hearing more, maybe get a follow-up on how the season went or how it's going, maybe midway through, something like that. Addison, always appreciate you having you on the show, and excited to hear more about Chevy. I hope this the spec opener in Arkansas is probably a really good opportunity for a young dog, mainly because it's warmer and potentially drier, and that there's probably going to be an abundance of opportunity out there. So good luck with that.
Yep. And Chris, we'll want to plan. So tentatively this coming April or May, I've got a new product that I can talk your head off for about 6 hours on that I'm super excited about. So we'll have to make sure, kind of like this one, we haven't told anybody about the door cover. We're launching it in 2 weeks. Love to get back on and talk about that other new product that we've got coming out in April.
Heck yeah, man. We love launching new products. That's exciting. I mean, that's a lot of what our listeners are into. They're into the gear, everything we do, every episode like that. They're fired up about it. So anytime you want to come on here and launch a product, I'm more than happy to have you.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank y'all.
Yeah, no problem. I'd like to thank our guests, Addison Edmonds and Luke Moore from Gunner Kennels. It was great having them on the show and kind of talking Luke through potentially his retriever Goose's last season. I'd like to thank our producer, Chris Isaac, for doing a fantastic job of putting the show together and getting it out to you. And I'd like to thank you, the listener, for joining us on the DU podcast and supporting wetlands conservation.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the DU podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show, and visit www.ducks.org/DU podcast for resources based on today's topics, as well as access to more episodes. Opinions expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect those of Ducks Unlimited. Until next time, stay tuned to the ducks. Stay tuned to the ducks.